9 days of silence had taught David more than 9 years of marriage ever did. When Mira walked through the door that evening, suitcase rolling behind her, glowing like a woman returning from something far more personal than a work conference, David felt a cold certainty settle in his chest, the kind that arrives only when the body already knows what the mind refuses to accept. He smiled, kissed her forehead, took her bag. But somewhere beneath his calm exterior, a plan had already begun forming, one built not on accusation, but on patience, and the quiet promise of a reckoning she never saw coming. Over dinner, Mira couldn't stop talking about Arjun, her work husband, she called him, laughing at how inseparable they'd become during the conference. David had heard the phrase before, harmless office banter, nothing worth losing sleep over. But tonight her voice carried a warmth reserved for something deeper than colleagues, and greed flickered behind her words too. Mentions of a promotion Arjun had helped secure for her, a raise she hadn't told David about. He nodded along, memorizing every slip, every name, every detail she gave away without realizing she was handing him a loaded weapon. Later, while Mira showered, David sat frozen beside her phone, charging silently on the nightstand, his hand hovering but never touching. Instead, memory pulled him 3 weeks back, to a grocery store where a stranger named Priya had introduced herself as Arjun's wife, laughing that she'd never once met Mira despite years of their spouses working closely together. At the time, David had shrugged it off. Now, insecurity crept in, whispering the question he dreaded most. Had everyone around him seen the truth long before he allowed himself to? He said nothing that night, nor the next morning, choosing instead to watch, the way she smiled at her phone during breakfast, the way she stepped outside for calls she once took openly. Each secrecy confirmed what his gut had whispered for weeks, yet fear held him back from confronting her too soon. What if he was wrong? What if 40 years of marriage crumbled over a misunderstanding? But deeper than that fear was a colder one, the fear of staying blind forever, of being the only person in the room who didn't already know the truth. 3 nights later, David invited Mira to a candlelit dinner at home, her favorite wine poured, her favorite music playing. She mistook it instantly for romance, for reconciliation, and relaxed into comfort David had carefully engineered. She spoke more about Arjun, more about the conference, more about how supportive he had been. David let her dig deeper, let her guard fall completely, curiosity burning inside him, not about whether she was lying, but about how far she would go before catching herself. He waited until dessert, until her fork was halfway to her mouth, before he spoke. "Did he tell you I already met his wife?" The question left David's mouth quietly, almost gently, without a trace of accusation. But its effect was immediate and devastating. Mira's fork froze mid-air. Color drained from her face as if someone had pulled a plug deep inside her. For 9 days she had worn a smile like armor, and in one sentence, it shattered completely. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was suffocating, thick with everything neither of them had said, confirming every suspicion without a single word spoken aloud. What are you talking about?" Mira finally stammered, panic bleeding through her voice. David explained calmly, the grocery store, Priya's introduction, the casual mention of a husband who never once brought his closest colleague home or spoke her full name aloud. Mira's hands trembled reaching for her wine glass, knocking it over instead, red liquid spreading across the white tablecloth like a wound opening between them. David watched, strangely still, surprise mixing with something colder, the realization that he'd been living beside a stranger wearing his wife's face for 8 months. Mira scrambled for excuses, work stress, loneliness, harmless friendship blown out of proportion. But David had already seen enough, the delayed response, the shattered composure, words that wouldn't have needed defending if there was nothing to hide. Calmly, he asked to see her phone. Mira hesitated, eyes darting toward her bag across the room, and that single hesitation told him everything 3 weeks of quiet observation had been building toward. Past belief crumbled in that instant. The version of Mira he thought he knew had never fully existed. Reluctantly, she handed it over. Using her predictable password, David unlocked a truth far worse than suspicion. Messages too intimate for colleagues, admissions neither of them should have entertained, and hotel confirmations showing only 1 room booked, not 2. He scrolled in silence, hands steady despite the storm inside him. Then, near the bottom of the thread, a message stopped him cold. Arjun had once written, half joking, that David would never be smart enough to notice. Shock turned to something sharper, not heartbreak alone, but humiliation, the realization that he had been the punchline in a story he didn't know he was part of. David set the phone down gently, a stark contrast to the devastation now visible on Mira's face. She broke down crying, apologizing, insisting distance and loneliness had clouded her judgment. David listened without interrupting, no longer interested in justifications. He had already seen the evidence, already felt 8 months of trust dissolve into nothing. What he wanted now wasn't reconciliation. It was clarity. And beneath that clarity sat a colder, sharper insecurity. Had he simply not been enough, or had he never truly been chosen at all? Over the next hour, Mira confessed the affair had begun nearly 8 months ago, hidden behind fake contact names and carefully timed work trips. David absorbed each admission with eerie stillness, memories rapidly recontextualized, every late excuse, every exhausted smile, every lie he'd swallowed without question. The pieces fit together with sickening precision. And then came the final blow. Mira admitted Arjun had encouraged her to ask David for a loan months ago, money meant to fund a surprise trip. A trip, David now realized, she had taken without him, funded partly by his own trust. That night, David packed a bag and left without another word, driving aimlessly through empty streets, replaying Priya's innocent introduction weeks earlier, the thread fate had quietly handed him in a grocery store aisle. He felt no satisfaction in being right, only a hollow ache where certainty used to live. Mira called repeatedly, her texts growing more desperate, more pleading. David let each one go unanswered, understanding now that some truths, once spoken aloud, can never be unheard, and some silences carry more devastation than any confession ever could. Weeks later, David filed for divorce, choosing clarity over chaos. He called Priya once, thanking her, unknowingly, for the truth she'd handed him that ordinary afternoon. She fell silent, then broke down, realizing her own marriage carried the same hidden betrayal she'd never suspected. Both of them began rebuilding separately, forever changed by a discovery neither had asked for. But what haunted David most wasn't the affair itself, it was Arjun's message, still burned into his memory. He'll never be smart enough to notice. He had noticed, and that changed everything.